Hello, everybody. Erica Hargreave here, and I'm going to walk you through a presentation that I gave in Bogota in Colombia, not this past summer, but the summer before. And it was all on bringing brands and stories to life through transmedia creativity, which is essentially, one of the is what we're looking at in this course. Transmedia, for those of you that are unaware, is basically taking stories across platforms and allowing audience engagement on some of those platforms. And with digital storytelling, many digital storytelling projects can be transmedia as well. Um, because it's that interactive nature and the story existing in more than one place and being told slightly differently in those different places. And we're going to look at some of that through this presentation today. So just continuing on into the presentation. One of the things I personally love about transmedia is it's fun, it's thought-provoking and inspiring. But it doesn't have to be expensive. When I gave this presentation in Bogota, it was me and a number of American transmedia producers that were creating things for Hollywood films, and so they were showing up their splashy things with Pirates of the Caribbean and stuff like that, which I have to say was awfully cool. But the realities is you don't need those big budgets to do this. In fact, I mean, that's been one of the exciting things for us. You don't even need a small television budget to do this. You can roll out different sections of your project into different degrees depending on the financing that you have. And um, for us, we really bootstrapped it from the beginning. So we're doing it with the little bits and pieces that we had on our abilities with our team, um, and work darn hard to create a lot of our initial projects. So what you do need to make a transmedia project happen is you need to have vision, you need clear goals, creativity, and as I mentioned before, hard work. Um, and if you've got those things, you can manage a transmedia project on any budget size. It just means you might be rolling out different sections at different times, which is very much what we do on our projects. And a transmedia producer really can be anyone as long as you've got those skills. For example, myself, I actually started out in life as a biologist and scientist. And it was the storytelling side of me that kind of launched me into a broadcast career. Um, Actually, back in the day, because I didn't have any broadcast skills, I ended up taking some part-time studies classes at BCIT and sort of in voice and acting and things like that. But yeah, it was that creative side that, had me create my first, kids science show in which I ended up basically getting thrown into the whole thing and having getting a degree in, the hard knocks of life, learning what not to do and everything like that. But yeah, and then these days I've ended up, sort of still in mainstream media, especially from writing and possibly with another television series on the horizon. But where myself and the team that I work with find our true love is in the is in sort of this digital and transmedia storytelling. And of course, I also love to teach, and thanks to courses like this, I'm able to keep my finger in that area. So you guys have all heard of the triple threat when it comes to acting, which is the ability to sing, and act. Well, I believe that transmedia has its own triple threat, and I believe that sort of triple threat of transmedia style is that you're hardworking, because it does. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of yeah, it takes a lot of work to really take your project off the ground. You're creative and you're not afraid of a challenge. And with that, to problem solve and look at new ways of telling a story and not being afraid to try them. However, over the years, the true secret of my success, and I might even be able to get her to say something to you guys right here, is to cohabit with the cat. She's a bit of a squeaker rather than a meower. Anyhow, that's my cat, and the inspiration behind one of the characters that we have in our storytelling. And she does do her own stunts, although she hasn't been on camera recently. I'll have to talk to her about that. So what I'm originally going to take you through is a case study in some transmedia character storytelling, and specifically from this gal that you see on the screen in front of you, whose name is Emmy Rogers. And for our company, Emmy is who taught us about transmedia storytelling. Essentially, we had a writer who was known for her children's writing, and she'd created a bit of a Bridget Jones's Diary style character. And the intention of this Bridget Jones's Diary style character was to produce a series of books. The problem being, though, is that in those days, nobody was going to take this writer seriously in any genre but children's and educational. So that was the problem that was presented to us. And so what we did with Emmy, and this was very much suits Emmy's character, is Emmy is not one to like to stay where she's told to be. And so, having to, the desk covers of a book were somewhat restrictive to her. And so what we did with Emmy is we let Emmy escape the dust covers of that book and start a life on the web. And so that's exactly what she did. She sashayed her way onto the web. And this was in the early days of social media. And spaces like Twitter here are really what launched Emmy, and what sort of created a pendulum swing for our writer. Before Emmy, she would only have been seen as children's and educational. Now people will let her write anything, and it means now that when the author goes after, I think the intention is still to publish Emmy under Emmy's name as opposed to the author's name, but when that author goes after a publisher, the beauty now is that she can also say to the publisher, this is the audience. Emmy's already got an audience. She's already got an audience around the world. And she already has sort of tens of thousands of readers each month. And that's something of huge value, especially, for an author that, while she's done a lot of writing over the years, she's never written novels. And this is the kind of, thing that will make a publishing company look twice and give her a shot, which is fabulous. And as I said, this was really where Emmy built her audience. In those days when we first did this, we were unaware of the fact that characters weren't accepted on the web in those days. We were just kind of, as I said, bootstrapping it and experimenting and seeing what happened and what worked. And we hit it over the head time and time again with Emmy. And in a way that we were completely not expecting. And part of this was this engagement online, and the ability for the audience to engage back with the story and inevitably impact the story, although, at the end of the day, we still control the story, but we now have the choice to allow that audience to impact our story, and the audience whether they do impact the story or not, they feel as though they're impacting the story and that they've become a part of it, which is, I mean, if you think about it in storytelling, that's really, really wonderful. I mean, I think back to a lot of the children's books that I used to read back in the day, and the idea, if I could have become, do you know what I mean? Interacted with those characters within those stories and, felt like I'd become a part of the story, that would have been just, oh, I would have been over the moon with excitement. And, even from, the early days of Emmy, because Emmy ended up paving the way for characters on the web, and she ended up doing that simply because there was this audience out there of sorry. The reason why she did that is because Vancouver's technology community fell in love with her, and so they ended up saying, "Okay, this is the sort of character we're ready for, and we're ready to accept on the web." And because they did that, that then opened the door for um, some other characters to also be successful and to be accepted on the web. And in those early days, Emmy was friends with a lot of those new characters. There was this um, somewhat well, amusing but also scandalous sort of cartoon character by the name of Lord Likely that came out of England. And so, Lord Likely and Emmy had their own relationship, usually, where Lord Likely was suggesting that Emmy do something quite scandalous to him. Uh, and there was also the True Blood characters. They were written by fan fiction writers. They popped up on the web around at the same time, and they were actually a really wonderful experience for us because we ended up getting to meet with some of the fan fiction writers that wrote these True Blood characters when they came to town, and having all sorts of wonderful conversations around what it was like, you know, writing this other person in the digital space and the relationships that you created through that. But going back to, how I would have loved to have become a part of some of these childhood stories when I was a little kid, um, the True Blood characters kind of opened some of that for us because Emmy used to get invited onto, girls' nights out with Suki Bon Tomps and, or sorry, Suki Stackhouse, but and the other Bon Tomps ladies when they were going out on a digital excursion to some bar to have a ladies' night or things like that, and it really was a real hoot. Um, we still have a lot of fun with what we do around this, but those early days there was some really wild experiences in those early days, and it very much was the Wild West where we were all trying to figure it out. Now, as I said though, Emmy doesn't like to be refrained in, like constrained in things, and inevitably at some stage of the game, the web became its own constraint. And so, just like she, sashayed her way out of the desk cover and onto the web, she eventually strut herself into real life. And to this day, she's probably. I mean, I think that there's, that we've had authors and things like that create characters, um, who have taken their characters into real life throughout the ages. I still think it's something that is somewhat unique and is certainly a real, something that is a defining difference from in the stories of Emmy is Emmy is a truly transmedia character, and she does exist in real life, and you can see her here. This is with a past star of a CBC series, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with him online, but Raul Pacheco, who used to be quite a popular Vancouver blogger, and he's now based in Mexico, but he goes under the name Hummingbird 604. He used to love to play in Emmy stories, and still does. And Emmy, and we're all at a CBC event here in one of the local malls. I think actually this was in Burnaby. This was just over at I think it's called Willingdon. I'm not a mall person, so it's always hard to remember what malls are which malls. Okay, so our goals with Emmy. I mean, we were having a lot of fun with the storytelling here, but we did have, I mean, especially to invest the amount of time that we've invested in her, there had to be, some real goals in place to, because she's now existed online for years upon years upon years. So in business, the goals were to build Emmy as her own author. And also secondarily to experiment in the digital space and see what worked. We have achieved both of those goals. And um, and we've achieved them, to the extent that we actually have people regularly approaching Emmy to ask her to write for different publications or do different things. We've even been approached over the years about having her in a television series, web series, the whole nine yards. And as far as experimenting in the digital space, I mean, she's really what taught us as a company how that space works, and for in Canada, a lot of the broadcast community too, because we use what we learned from her to teach a lot of the broadcast community about what works and what doesn't work in the space. And we still use her to experiment. Whenever we're, testing out a new, something new on the web, usually we throw Emmy in there first and see, see, really play around with how she's using it. On the personal side, and inevitably any of our stories tend to have a little, underlying message or tone to them. But on the personal side, we wanted to empower women with Emmy. We wanted to, and empower them to feel sexy in their own skin. We wanted to champion the arts and charitable initiatives, and also to really give a voice and some publicity to a lot of smaller, more indie arts things, like a lot of the musicians in Canada, as well as smaller theater companies and things like that. And we also wanted to get people thinking and laughing. And once again, I think we've hit all of our goals, and we continue to hit all of our goals in these areas. And the interesting thing for us is, even though we've gone and we've explored down different routes over the years with Emmy, and we've had some periods where, and which I'll talk about in just a minute, that it's like, oh really, we did that. I think we've been these core set of goals still sticks with us and still resonates with our team and our whole team, which is important to us. So we learned many things from her over the years. One of the things that was the most surprising to us is, early on we thought we were writing a story for women. And we discovered from our audience, and this is one of the beauties of the digital space, is you can actually get an idea of who your audience is, although a somewhat skewed one, simply because men tend to interact more online than women do, and especially, and that's also age dependent. Like we have quite a large population of women in their 40s and 50s that read our stories, but most of them don't engage with our stories. But so one of the things we learned from this is, we learned that our audience was actually 50% men, and that men needed just as much empowerment as women. We actually had men that were connecting to some of our embarrassing moment stories, which were very much, embarrassing moments on the part of a woman stories, but they were actually connecting with those, and they didn't have somebody to talk to about that kind of thing, because I guess men don't talk to each other so much about that, and so Emmy gave them an outlet to talk to about that, and an outlet that they felt safe with, and she protected their stories with too. Um, uh, we also learned that adults need a silly outlet that makes them laugh. When Emmy first came out, she came out when we were all in a recession around the world, and that was needed more than ever. And it, you know, they needed that silliness to make them laugh, but and the beauty was what we were creating online was free for them too, so they could get that laugh for free as well. Um, this part, this part is still certainly true. I'm personally thinking right now we're in a time period where people also need some sort of media that makes them feel empowered, that makes them feel that the world can be a better place. And that smart is sexy, and I don't think they're getting that right now from television, because I think we're dumbing down a lot of what we're producing on television and creating it for the lowest common denominator. And so I know with one of our new projects, Romancing, that's kind of what we're looking at, is we're looking at the idea that no, people want things that are actually going to make them want to be better people and empower them to see the beauty and love in this world. And that's with our next project, that's kind of our focus. Um, uh, we discovered that from having created this, we were having brands, television series, web series, magazines approaching us wanting to be a part of Emmy's stories, which was pretty incredible, because that was not something we intended at all in the first place, and that's when we really started to discover that there was commercial value behind this. We also discovered people buy things that Emmy talks about. And I'm glad we discovered that early on, because we've always been very careful that the things that we talk about are things that we actually believe in, because we never want to lead our audience astray. And what I mentioned just above is that Emmy has commercial value to her, and she's got that commercial value because she has an audience. She has a relationship with her audience, and they trust her. And that's invaluable. And that, my friends, is why you're starting to see brands, really looking to certain, online storytellers, bloggers, people like that, to help them share their message and tell their stories, is because those people have a personal relationship with their audience, and their audience trusts them. Like what we've done here is we haven't just built an audience, we've built a community. And that's the big difference when you're talking, interactive, engaging storytelling, especially, in the digital space, because it allows for that engagement. Now, as I said, we've made mistakes along the way. When Emmy was being sort of looked at for a television series with CTV, the broadcaster at CTV was suggesting to Emmy that she needed to start to be, more ballsy and, more risque and the whole 9 yards. And as a result, she had some fashion choices which I believe were somewhat questionable. This one included, I think she started to go slightly too on the tardy side. And this was something that one of the other things that we learned from Emmy's stories is men find Emmy to be very sexy, but a lot of that is about the fact that she's about the tease. She doesn't bear it all. She even when she's done underwear shots over the years, there's been a lot left to the imagination. And in this time period, I think Emmy was becoming a little bit too leaving, she was leaving less to the imagination. And so I don't think this was a bright period in our storytelling. However, and we hummed and hawed. Do we take these pictures off the web? Do we erase this part of Emmy's digital life? And ultimately, at the end of the day, we decided not to. And the reason why we decided not to is because Emmy's story is the story of a woman who's finding her way through love and life. And let's face it, we all make mistakes, and those mistakes is almost what makes us more lovable. These are the kind of questions that many of us go through as women, and so rather than trying to hide them, we decided this made Emmy more real, and so we acknowledged them, we learned from them. Um, you know, when necessary, you apologize for them and you move forward. And I think these moments are, as I said, what made Emmy more real and ultimately created some additional storytelling for us about her, sort of processing some of that aloud in the digital space. Now, as I said, one of the things that we've started on a new tale, which is all about finding love and peace in the world, and that's romancing. And this was also one of the needs for us giving Emmy a real life look, was because we suspected we were going to put her on camera for this. And I think if I click on this, yes, it will take us through to a video. But my big question is, I want to see a little more skin from the men.
Why can't we all have a marching band is the real question, Annie.
Yes, woo!
We want to present each of them a key to our city.
Usually people don't trust me with keys to their homes, let alone keys to the city. I think I videotaped my coat as I went across because I was too afraid to hang on to the camera.
Do you think she'll find love on the hill?
Everybody finds love on the hill. That's why we come here.
Okay, this is what Emmy does, and then it freaks me out.
Now, romancing itself is a story that our team had in mind to create for a number of years, but we had a whole series of stumbling blocks that we had with it. First of all, initially it was Emmy and Bree's story, and Emmy and Bree are characters, and the realities were to create an ongoing travel series with just two characters would mean that we were going to be on the road all the time, and we didn't want to be on the road all the time. And so we were trying to figure out how does that work, and how do we get the funding to do what we wanted to do with it, because what we wanted to do with it and what we still want to do with it is quite large compared to what we're doing right now. And so we played the Canadian funding game and trying to get, and that was, a few years after we'd had this idea, you were starting to get, all sorts of CMF funding around interactive and digital and things like that. And so we played that game, and we started realizing that game was almost destroying our project and being quite encumbersome, and slowing it down. And so we eventually, realized it's like, well, hey, we know how to build all the elements here. So why don't we just go ahead and build them and put this out in different stages? And so us putting out the the website and the social media feeds for Romancing is what I really consider to be our alpha stage of the project. And eventually we've got these much larger things that we want to do with this, including an augmented reality game in here, and we're now being approached by a television series from Romancing. We've actually been approached by a television series all along. I just kept saying no until somebody approached us with something that really appealed to us. And so we're currently, I think, still in alpha, but alpha for us is actually turning Romancing into a digital magazine that has very real, sponsors behind it. And so that's been exciting. And that also has, reinforced the fact that, that there's markets behind this new, these newer forms of storytelling. I don't want to say new because I don't think they're new any longer. And how we solve the problem of, not wanting to be on the road with two characters all the time is, somewhere along the lines we kept having real life travel writers approaching us about writing to these sites. We kept saying, no, 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 this is a character, driven story. And then all of a sudden we realized our stories have never been about our characters. Our stories have always been about the communities in which the characters are interacting, and we've always turned the story not onto our characters, but onto the world around them. And it's the same thing here. And we'd already started to have real life writers writing as themselves on Emmy's site. And so finally the light bulb went off, and it was, the realization that one of the things that we've always done in our storytelling that's worked for us is we've blurred the lines between reality and fiction. And, why not take that a step further with Romancing? And so Romancing is, well, it's really a digital travel magazine at the moment, and a digital travel magazine that includes the story of real life travel writers along with our character writers. And I stuck this picture of Miss Cato in here because Cato's ultimately the reason, she's one of my reasons why I don't want to be on the road all the time. I know with my business partner, Lori, her reasons involve her children and her dog, Mango, and her husband. But, while I love traveling, for me, home is very important too. And so, yeah. So even though she helps inspire our story, in some ways she also makes us look at them more realistically too. Okay, moving on from Miss Cato. Just as I mentioned before, we're combining fiction with reality. In this case, Emmy here being the fictional character, and Katrina Germain being a real life storyteller based out of Saskatchewan. And I'm just going to click on this because, no, oh yes, there is a video. I thought there was. And here is one of the adventures that we took together. Emmy and Katrina take a lot of...
What I realized about humanity is that there's some very nice people, but there's very few interesting people. I think
That's
you
what
had that epiphany before in a bar once.
That's what I realized. I think I did, but it's true.
Accroché en haut de mon toit, elle se moque de moi.
There was this 20-page story of him having hemorrhoidal surgery at the charity ward at LA County Hospital. It was hilarious. Just hilarious. Painful, but hilarious.
Does anybody know how to get to Yorkton?
Les jours de pluie se dessinent, imposant.
Hello, darlings. Here we are on our Yorkton romancing trip, Toontown to Yorkton. And, you know, as we can see, Katrina Ham is still looking fabulous, whereas I have windswept hair.
Handkerchief.
Yes, hers worked better than mine, by a long shot.
Encore une fois.
See, she still looks fabulous. I'm completely jealous. But, you know what this means? It just means that, you know, I'll enjoy beating her on the gun range that much more because of it.
One of the best things you can eat in Saskatchewan is Chinese food. Every small town has the best restaurants. We are going into Wong's restaurant in Lanigan, Saskatchewan, on our way to Yorkton. Let's see how this goes.
I have to say, I quite enjoyed lunch, even when I was eating Chinese food with a knife and fork. Yorkton, Saskatchewan?
Rocks.
Fuck yeah!
And I'm Morgo, the friendly drow.
The Walmart theater.
This is Charlie Cougar Killer.
Composure, everybody.
Composure, everybody. Okay. What
We're
are we?
on.
We're on.
We're on.
We're on.
We're
We're
on.
on. We're currently pulling into the city of Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and we're heading to go to a ceremony where they're, I believe we're going to be receiving the key to the city from the mayor. Yes, because we're that cool. Or at least, you know, somebody thinks we're that cool.
Where's the parade?
Yes. I wanted a marching band. Katrina, why have I not got a marching band?
Why can't we all have a marching band is the real question, Emmy.
We're here.
We want to present each of them a key to our city.
Usually people don't trust me with keys to their homes, let alone keys to the city. So thank you.
Matching keys.
I know.
Keys.
Keys. I didn't think anybody would ever give me a key to a city. That's really hilarious. I know. So yeah, so that's a bit of an example of how we've been blending fiction with reality in the case of Emmy being the character in the car and everybody else being real. And Katrina happens to be one of the real life individuals that tends to have regular adventures with Emmy. They now do that road trip to Yorkton on a yearly basis. They just don't get presented with keys to the city every year. And so what we discovered from romancing is, and just going ahead and starting to do it was, you know, the whole field of dreams, you know, build it and they will come. Well, build it and they did come. And we had an audience really, really quickly with this storytelling site, partially because we'd been building Emmy up for a good 6 months beforehand in a travel niche community online. And we'll get into talking about niche communities later on in the course. Yeah, we had this, like, we hit the ground running, and as I was saying how it's really a digital magazine now, we actually have the site numbers there now that we are considered to be mainstream media with the size of our audience, and because of how quickly we hit the ground running with this, I think within a month or two of us launching, I was asked to speak in Egypt, which led to several trips of Egypt, sort of in the period just post Arab Spring and leading up to the presidential elections. And that actually was that's took us into a whole case study on We Visit Egypt, where myself I'm pointing at the screen with my hand right now, which really doesn't do you any good, but myself here and Audrey and Dan from a site called Uncornered Market, we were brought in that just before the presidential elections in the spring of 2012, and we were brought in to start to get the message out there that travel in Egypt was safe again, um, and let people know of all the kinds of wonderful experiences that you could have. And like, we really did have some fabulous experiences. This is us heading into the desert in Fayoum, and here we're talking with a Bedouin fellow on the Red Sea. We'd sort of dirt biked into or quad biked into a Bedouin camp, and this is Dan and Audrey sort of all set to do that dirt bike ride. And these here is in the desert in Fayoum, and that's like the skeleton of an ancient whale, which was pretty fabulously incredible. So those are all fossils there, and here's us parasailing over the Red Sea. And so this sort of gives you an example of how, the audiences that we've built and that relationship that we've created with our audiences online has commercial value to it. And in this case, for Egypt to help tell the story that at that time, travel was safe, and, they brought us in from North America to help, rebuild and get the word out there. I'm going to actually go a bit more in when we talk about real-time storytelling later on. I'm going to go through, this whole project that Dan and Audrey and I did together, because it was quite a successful project in real-time storytelling. But right now, I'll just skim through some of the slides on this. When we were brought in, our first trip to Egypt, this was actually the day that Audrey and Dan had arrived, and my second night there. Yet the three of us were totally unaware that was happening, even though we were in Cairo at the time, because this was my night, and I'll go into this a little further with you later. There's actually a video attached to this. And Audrey and Dan's night, sort of, going around and eating at with food vendors. And the beauty of the whole thing is that with digital media these days is we can actually quantify and qualify the metrics. And once again, this is a slide that we'll go into in more detail when we get to that section of the course, because we wowed the socks with this particular presentation off at a UNWTO conference in Marsa Alam, which is on the Red Sea, and our audience was very skeptical. They'd been treating us as though, what are these, online digital storytellers, and they weren't terribly polite to us initially, and they did a complete about face after this presentation. So that's just more on that. So that's, some ways that, I sort of gave you a little taste there of what you can, how there's commercial value to the storytelling online. One of the things that we like to always do within our stories is we like to have, those real world, real life kind of elements to them. And for us with romancing, one of the ways that we're doing that is Lori, who's featured here, has been developing a romancing strut for us. And I'm going to show you the first stab at the romancing strut. After me traveling and trying it out for a year on the road, we've decided to change it, and so we now have a new romancing strut, just because one of our goals with this, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the dancing mat videos online, but it's this you know, this guy who, you know, had this little geeky dance that he did all over the world, and people around the world started to join in with him. Um, and there's look it up, Dancing Mad on YouTube, because it's a lot of fun. Um, and he actually got funded by Strident Gum for going around the world and creating those videos. And so we've got our kind of little spoof on them, a little bit sexier, that we call the Romancing Strut. Or the original version was called the Romancing Strut. The new version, which I'll probably show you later on in the course, I just need to edit some of the videos for it, is called the Romancing Red Boot Stomp. But this is kind of geeky, and Lori loves showing me off geeky around the world, so I will show Lori off doing some geeky Romancing Red Boot Strut stuff here. This was her initial how-to video that she did on the whole thing.
Hi, I'm Bree, and I'm going to teach you our romancing red boot dance. This dance was created for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Consider it your romantic profile. So the first thing you're going to do is strike a pose. For me, mine's going to look like this. But maybe for you, you want something a little more macho or funky. So after the pose, you're going to hold it for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you're going to give me 4 walks. Any style. I'm a pretty happy person, so I like to be skippy. 1, 2, 3, 4. But maybe you're a little more bashful. 2, 3, 4. Or you might be a real funky person. Either way, give me your best 4 walks. So back to the pose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Walk. 2, 3, 4. Rock your arm in the air and swing side to side. 1, 2. Now give me a spin around. Woohoo! Drop down to the ground, jump up, and kick. Then you're going to make a grand exit. I like to just walk. But maybe you want to run. Maybe you want to do the I'm out of here because I don't dance kind of exit. Or maybe after you hit your big kick, you want to keep pumping your air guitar right out of there. It's up to you. Show us who you are. So, here's the whole thing put together. And pose. 2, 3, 4, and walk. 2, 3, 4. Swing your arm. 2, and spin. Woohoo! Down, up, kick. I'm gonna miss you.
So yeah, so that's just a little bit of silly storytelling that we've got in there, and eventually what we would love to see is we would love to see that you know, that when we're off doing that, that people from around the world kind of jump in. Although now we've got the Romancing Red Boot Stomp instead, which is a little bit more simple, although still Lori's a dancer originally. So for me, it's still complex. And for most people joining in, it's still complex. But we've decided that that actually makes it funny. Because now what we have is we have me looking generally really bad, trying to do Lori's dance. And then everybody else goofily joining in and just having fun with it. And yeah. So that's like a little bit of our silliness that we put in our storytelling, but also that has like kind of real world ways of doing things. And I'm still, you know, I still kind of like the idea of Lori's Romancing Red Boot Strut too, where, you know, the idea of doing the shout out there to see about people sending in their own, you know, struts or whatever. And that might be something that we return to at some stage of the game. It's always that thing where, you know, it's all about experimenting and having fun with the experiment. So I've introduced you to a couple of our stories that are our own stuff that we've been experimenting with and having fun with, and that also have real world, real world practicality to them in terms of sponsorship and stuff like that. But now what I would love to do is to take you through some sort of ways of applying this to other businesses and the things we've learned to other businesses. In one, example is a few years back we had the Shaw Rocket Fund, sort of, which is they're a funding body for children's and family programming in Canada, and they had this giant research document. It was huge, and it was all in a giant PDF, and it was all on how youth were using the web and mobile and accessing their entertainment. And they wanted to get it out there to the Canadian broadcast community because they wanted people in the Canadian broadcast community to start thinking about how they were creating their media and start thinking of new ways to create their media so that they could be well connected with our Canadian youth and better tell their stories. And in this case, so in this case, what we ended up doing for them is we ended up creating two digital characters. Their names were Sean and Shawnee Rocket. They were a pair of sort of producers. They had their cousins, and there was a whole silly spoof and backstory around their names. And they each had their own lives and their own interests and things like that. And specifically, it was Sean and Shawnee's fathers were both brothers, and they both had the same favorite grandfather who was called Sean Rocket. And so the one brother always, loudly announced that, he was naming his firstborn, after the grandfather, Sean Rocket. But his brother had a child first, and he named his son Sean Rocket. And so when the other brother ended up having a daughter as his first child, he was determined that that was going to be his daughter's name, so he called her Shawnee Rocket. And so there was this years and years worth of family feud between the two of them, which the kids ultimately thought was silly, and the two of them ended up becoming the best of friends, and they ended up building a media company together called 'Cause We Can Productions. And and they each had their own quirks, and they were very much like brother and sisters. Sean Rocket, who's featured here, was certainly saw himself as a little bit of a Casanova. He was also into all sorts of daredevil sports. He tended to write, for the older audience, the older youth audience within their company, and tended to do the slightly edgier things within the company, whereas Shawnee was a lover of cats, inevitably would try to put cats in every single production of theirs, and Sean would constantly take out his red pen and tell her that, the one thing that was more expensive than working with children was working with animals, and be red penning her cats out of her scripts. She was also very much a Disney lover, and would break into Disney show tunes all the time, and so she focused more on the younger children's audience within their company. And so what they would do is we built them up in the digital space and on a variety of social media platforms, and we engaged the broadcast community and producers around the country with them all the time. But they would take pieces of information from this huge, massive document, and they would share them online and have debates with each other on them. They were always arguing, and so they would have these debates and argue on these topics, and inevitably they would involve, Canada's broadcast community in those arguments and getting other people engaging around those tidbits, and in the process letting them know that there was this big document of research that they could access, but also sharing pieces from within that in getting the Canadian broadcast community talking about where they were going with digital media, and ultimately showing them an example of how you could tell story with digital media at the same time. Um, if you look them up online, we haven't run them for years, so they're not. And I think the Shaw Rocket Fund's no longer using them any longer, but um, they were a lot of fun to create. Another sort of example, a number of years ago, we had a show called Dust Up, which was all on crop dusters in the Canadian prairies, who had they were going to be airing on the History Channel, and they they were just about to broadcast. I think they were about a month, maybe a month and a half away from broadcast, and they had been given pretty much the shittiest time slot on the face of the planet in this country, which was during hockey playoffs, just as the weather was starting to turn nice outside, so in the spring. And this was a 6-part series, but they'd had their whole broadcast pushed into 3 weeks, so they were going to have, each time they broadcast, it was going to be, back to back half hours, so that it would only end up being 3 weeks. And that was pretty much a license to kill them by the broadcaster, and there'd be no marketing put into marketing the show whatsoever. So we were approached to try and save the show and try and get them another season. And doing that by getting the word out there on the show. And the way we did that was we found all these niche communities online, that that had people that were interested in things like farming, airplanes, uh, toy airplanes, you name it, any sort of little niche audience that could be, it could be the audience for these guys. We were engaging and creating little pieces of story out there in, and as a result, that audience ended up building up our digital media community really, really beautifully in a very, very short period of time under a very small budget. And it worked. I mean, they got the viewership there for the night that the show premiered, to the point that the producer of the show was told by the broadcaster that she was drinking champagne out of her shoe the next morning. That's definitely what you like to hear. One of the things that that also worked with us with Dust Up is that it had some compelling and quirky content to it, and the people that were doing the television side of things were wonderfully helpful in sharing and creating some great little online videos, that were sort of secondary from the series, that they could share with us to share with the our online audience. And so I'll show you one of them here.
In addition to the pig spleen forecasting, there's some medicinal sides to the pig spleen as well.
Yes, if you want to be more romantic, then you eat some spleen, something like an aphrodisiac.
So forget about oysters, just get the pig spleen.
Yeah, both partners have to eat it though, or else one partner may overpower the other one. It's also good for rheumatism.
So that was a little bit of historic footage that they'd gotten hold of from some farming show back in the day, that they got the rights to, and so they could share on YouTube within the series format, and little pieces like that were just kind of silly and allowed us to build some great story content online, were wonderful. And I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, that's one of the things that really works is that compelling content. Now, there are many pitfalls to avoid online. One of the reasons one of, like, and a huge pitfall is egos and disrespect for your audience. We've seen this time and time again with people that have tried to copy what we've done with Emmy. Specifically, anytime Emmy's referred to herself as a celebrity, it's been in jest, and where she's taking the piss out of something. And however, she is considered to be a sort of pseudo online celebrity. And so we've had a lot of people who have tried to copy that, and it's all been ego driven. With Emmy, it's about building the story of the people around her. And that's part of the reason why her audience has fallen in love with her. And so the gentleman that, and I'm pointing with my fingers again, I'll use the little cursor, the gentleman in the photo here with Emmy, he was somebody that we ran into outside of this event. It was kind of the opening night bash at the Switzerland house at the Olympics, and he clearly didn't have, the cred to get in. And we did, and we could tell he was another character, and so, it perked our interest, and so we invited him and his cameraman in with us. And he ended up basically turning out to be the biggest asshole on, excuse my language, but this guy basically, and his team, and I shouldn't say this guy because I think he was just an actor hired by his team, but they were marketing guys that were basically trying to build a name for their marketing company through the Olympics by creating this character that was called Gaston. And Gaston and we should have done our research before we invited him into this event, but he basically was all about making fun of people in different cultures at the Olympics, and gaining attention to himself and being a bit of a media whore, chasing after, like, the mainstream cameras and stuff like that. And so he did get on to a lot of big network shows during the Olympics. However, his character died shortly after the Olympics. I think they changed his media feeds after the Olympics into basically commercial feeds selling different things. And he also took credit on camera of being the first sort of transmedia character of his time, which he knew darn well was not the case, since he'd met Emmy right at the beginning of their trip, and knew we'd been doing Emmy for years, and so needless to say, he annoyed the online audience, because once they realized what he was doing, once they saw that he was trying to take credit for things that we'd actually done back in the day, he very much pissed off Vancouver's digital community, and especially when they saw everything turn to spam. So he died a quick death after the Olympics. He might have got some flash in the pan attention during the Olympics, but it was not, there was no longevity to it because of how disrespectful he was of his audience and his ego. Another pitfall is knowing your audience. There was a web series that came out for tweens a few years back, and it was called Ruby Sky PI. And they were trying to say that they were transmedia by using things like, Flickr and Twitter and stuff like that. But all of their transmedia spaces were for adults, not tweens. And so, for example, on Twitter, it was just about, sharing the accomplishments of the show and announcing to everybody in the broadcast community how great they were and this is why they were so great. And on Flickr, it was sharing pictures of the same producers over and over again, and at the same events where they'd have sets set up where it was all the same pictures of the same three women in three different things, like, at the same pictures basically in each of these albums. And, you know, that's not interesting, I'm sorry, but, you know, if you're creating a show for tweens, sharing pictures of your adult producers, you know, hanging out and drinking cocktails, you're kind of missing your audience there. And you know what? This isn't about you. This is about your characters. But the second part, like, you know, the whole Twitter feed, you know, in those days, that was when we were running Sean and Shawnee Rocket. And so we wanted to see some Canadian success stories out there. So we were telling them, I think through Sean and Shawnee Rocket, that, you know, hey, you know, why aren't these feeds actually, you know, something that a tween would like? Why can't our characters actually talk? Like, I mean, you've got the picture set up as though it's Ruby Sky. You have the name set up as though it's Ruby Sky. Why isn't Ruby Sky responding back as opposed to, you know, you guys just telling us how great you are? And their belief of the whole thing was that kids weren't smart enough to discern between reality and fiction, and that they would be confusing kids in the process. And you know what? Kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And I think that's actually one of the problems with our broadcast system is that we dumb things down and don't think kids are sophisticated, but you just talk to any kid about dinosaurs and realize how much more they know than you, and how they are into all those really cool facts about the dinosaurs. You're going to learn pretty quickly that you know, that you know that you do have a sophisticated audience out there. And so that's one thing is, you know your audience, know who your audience is, and actually engage that audience. You know, using your social media feeds to share with the broadcast community within the country how great you are and how cool you are, you're completely missing the boat on who your actual audience is. Another pitfall is, you know, going over the top into flashy and micromanaged sites. This was the site for a CBC series called Insecurity, and you know, it was supposed to make it look like kind of like an FBI, like, you know, server office space or whatever, which was kind of cool. And they had like these data feeds from their agents and stuff like that, which was kind of cool. But the realities is these people, these characters they had online, A, tweeted very little, B, only tweeted during the Toronto broadcast of the show, and were sharing things that was happening in that broadcast, which meant that the rest of the company was having spoilers on the show. And I personally don't think you should ever tweet during an episode of a show, because I think it shows that one audience is more important than the others, but it also puts spoilers out there for the rest of the country. Twitter should be used for between episodes, not during them. And these NISA agents, that was they were called, I can't remember but it was called NISA. These NISA agents were only talking to each other, and they weren't talking to their broader audience out there, and they weren't actually engaging their audience. And even if you tweeted to them, they didn't tweet you back, or if they did, it was very rare or whatever that they would. And so they completely dropped the ball on this. And we were really trying to help them out, because this dude here, that's Richard Yearwood, who's you know, kind of a member of our company. And so we were doing our best to try and show them what to do and to try and help them out, and they just really dropped the ball. And it was all about, you know, they created something too flashy, and they didn't really understand how to be properly engaging, and they micromanaged. We were told that part of their problem, and I don't know if it's the case or not, but we were told that part of the problem on their Twitter feed was that they were only allowed to write what the script authors told them to write. And if that is the case, then wow, that's some serious micromanaging that, you know, doesn't work for doing social media feeds from characters online. So yeah. Now here's we have a duck that plays into romancing stories, and her name is Lucy Duck. You can actually see her. She's right there. And Lucy came to us from this site in the UK called chasingducksblog.com. And this was a really cool social experiment where they basically were sending out these ducks to travelers around the world, and the idea, and each duck has a serial number on them, and the idea was that you were supposed to take your duck on to some of your adventures with you and share your duck's experiences on their web platform here, and then ultimately at some point leave your duck somewhere for another traveler to pick up and continue your duck story. So fabulous idea. We were really excited about the whole thing. The problem is there's no community management on this system, and there's all sorts of problems, like the system does not work properly. And so that's one of the problems here. And when you share stuff from your duck, they've got nobody on there doing any engagement with you to make you feel, rewarded for doing things with your duck. And I know that for sure because we had one of the more popular ducks, who I think is still one of the more popular ducks on there, because nobody has engaged back with the people that have been sharing duck stories. And the second part of the problem is, we were also sharing on Twitter, and we were mentioning, chasing ducks on Twitter and on Facebook and other platforms. Never once did we have chasing ducks end up sort of engaging back with our story feeds. And as a result, this hasn't gone anywhere from, their initial site that they built and sending the ducks out around the world. And that's because they haven't properly valued, the online content storytelling and engaging with their audience. They probably put all of the work into creating the technology that doesn't completely work properly. And so with us, we're not sending Lucy out into the world to have her story die. So we'll continue to pass Lucy between our travelers within our team and telling her stories on our platform, because we don't feel Lucy's story should die. Now, I've shown you a few pitfalls. I want to end with showing you, an example of some great transmedia storytelling in action. In a local example too. And so for that local example, I picked a sort of a transmedia storytelling project from a few years ago that was called the Whistler Sabbatical Project. And this was an absolutely great concept. It was essentially Whistler asking, would you do it? And they'd be sharing different story bites from Whistler of things that people could do. And you as the audience would respond back with, yes, I'd do it, or no. And they had all sorts of silly, fun, things that would, for the no. But and every single time you responded to one of their videos, you then got re-entered into the contest. So I think over the course of a fall and winter, you could enter up to 19 times. And if you actually won this, you won a month sabbatical in Whistler, where you actually got paid a salary to be hanging out in Whistler and having all of these adventures. Really, really brilliant idea. You can hear in the background there, that's my cat within our stories who's meowing and telling me that she needs a cuddle right now. But so I'm just going to click on this, and so you can see their introduction video. So yeah, so that was a brilliant, brilliant idea on the part of Whistler Tourism, and they got a lot of online feedback for the months that they ran the project. They'd come out with a new video each week, and that people could play. It was always something that it was a beautiful video to watch and introduced you to things that you might not have known about from Whistler. And each time, to enter, with a new way into the contest, they would ask a question. So this one was for Wilderness Quest, but and it would say, after you watch the video, would you take a wilderness quest of body, mind, and spirit? So there was like, I'll do it, been there, done that. I'll take I'll I'll take the lift, thanks. So that one's not as funny as some of the other ones. Some of them had really funny responses that you could do back. And I'm gonna click on this. Doesn't go into the Whistler Wilderness story. It goes into a different one, but I'll click on it so you can see an example of one of the weekly videos.
I knew that I loved singing and performing, and when I was 9 years old, I joined the local show choir, which was all Disney songs and sparkly vests, and I joined only because all my friends were auditioning. Growing up as a kid in Whistler, you end up getting into skiing and mountain biking, but for this mountain girl, I also like artistic, kind of creative things. I love being creative, and I like hearing and playing great music. This place is just so beautiful, and it's just, you just cannot deny it, and it's presented so many opportunities for me musically. I would do a couple-hour gigs every week as a 15-year-old.
Once upon a times were meant to last, and I can't wait forever.
My most memorable Whistler performance was quite possibly the Olympics. Just being able to play to a crowd where I saw like 10 different flags, and sitting on the bus and having a German person come up to me and say, "I saw you in the village," like that was amazing. Then a French person next to me, it was really, really cool.
So some really great storytelling and some great bites and things that you didn't know about Whistler before that then got you excited about wanting to go up to Whistler during that ski season, that made you want to discover more about Whistler, which was really, really excellent. And, the sabbatical, if you want it, was set for April of that year, which is a slower month for Whistler. But it also meant that the storytelling content and the buzz, which was basically created at the beginning of September, carried all the way through to like close to the end of the ski season. And then at the end of the ski season, they had their winners, and it was a fellow from the UK, and so he and his buddy came to Whistler. And why they're in Whistler, this is part of the real world experience of the whole thing, is they shared their adventures in Whistler during that month. I think mainly in this point, I don't know that Luke was like, being an online guru was, and social media savvy was not, something that was required of them. So I think it was actually Whistler Mountain and Tourism that ended up sharing their adventures. But really, really, really clever. And Australia's been doing some similar examples around, I don't know if you've seen them, but the world's best job. And so I think their hashtag in that was the world's best job. In this, it was would you do it, was the hashtag, which is rather, a compelling hashtag, because it's like, would you do what? What's this all about? So yeah, so there's an example of a local example of a really successful campaign. And we're going to go look at some campaigns later on in this class towards the end, and build kind of a mini campaigns of our own. So in summary, to as we sort of broach and start into a the next 12 weeks of building and creating some stories and exploring this whole world, of transmedia and digital and interactive storytelling. You know, the key things for you to be successful out there is number one, be creative. Number two, know, engage, and respect your audience. Three, value the management of your community. So understand that it takes time, and you know, it's worth putting the effort into the time into that. And number four is approach the space with ethics. Don't try to dupe people out there. And so yeah, we will explore all of those things more as we begin to build, and I look forward to doing that with you. Thank you.